Hi everyone, we're Mimicker, here to introduce all kinds of knowledge, even the stuff we didn't know about.
Today is going to be a fascinating, and I think for some, a slightly disorienting journey into the human mind. We are looking at what has been described as the twin peaks of contemporary spiritual literature.
I love that description. We are talking, of course, about Eckhart Tolle, specifically his two massive cultural hits, The Power of Now, which dropped back in '97, and then A New Earth in 2005.
Exactly. And I think it's important to frame this right from the start. We aren't just, reviewing two self-help books here. We're analyzing a global phenomenon. These texts really fundamentally changed how millions of people view their own internal monologue.
It's truly wild when you look at the numbers. The Power of Now is translated into, 33 languages? It's basically the instruction manual for modern spirituality.
It really is.
And then A New Earth, thanks to that massive push from Oprah, it sold something like 15 million copies.
The scale is just undeniable. But our mission today is to go, well, a little deeper than the hype. We want to explore how he did it. How did Tolle repackage these ancient, very complex, non-dual traditions into language that your neighbor, your boss, and your grandmother could all understand? We're going to look at his specific diagnosis of the human condition.
Right, we're going to unpack the core concepts everyone talks about, the ego, the pain body, and see if they actually hold up. Then we'll look at how he scales that up to the collective level. But, and this is where it gets really interesting, we're also going to look at the stuff casual readers might miss. The critiques, the controversies.
And that's the I know you don't know segment of our deep dive. Because while these books offer, profound comfort, they also spark some significant debate around ethics, psychology, and, well, the commercialization of enlightenment.
Okay, let's dive right in. Let's start with that diagnosis. Tolle essentially positions himself as a doctor for the human spirit. So what's the illness he identifies?
Well, the foundational argument in The Power of Now is it's actually quite radical. Tolle argues that our suffering comes from a pathological identification with the mind.
Pathological identification. That's a heavy phrase. So basically, we think we are our thoughts.
Precisely. Most of us just assume that the voice in our head, the one that narrates our day, complains about the weather, rehearses arguments, that is us. Tolle says, no, that is just a tool, and it's a tool we've lost control of.
He calls this mind time, doesn't he?
Yes, mind time. It's this ceaseless stream of compulsive thought that just drags our consciousness into regretting the past or worrying about the future. And the result, we're effectively barred from experiencing the now.
It's the classic scenario, right? I'm in the shower, physically present, but in my head I'm actually arguing with my boss about a meeting that happened 3 days ago.
That is a perfect example of mind time. But notice the rhetoric he uses here. He doesn't just say, you worry too much. He frames the mind not as you, but as an illusory and life-draining entity.
Yeah, reading the source material, it almost feels like he's describing a parasite, like an external enemy that has taken up residence in our brains.
And that's a very deliberate rhetorical strategy. By pathologizing the mind, calling it insane or toxic, he creates this real sense of agency. It makes the reader want to disidentify. It turns spiritual awakening into like a matter of personal survival. You have to escape this thing to reclaim your life.
And the main character in this whole drama, the villain, if you will, is the ego. But Tolle's definition of ego isn't the Freudian one most of us know, is it?
No, it's very distinct. The ego, in Tolle's system, is a false self. It's an identity rooted in form. So that means possessions, job titles, social status, your beliefs.
So like, I am a successful podcaster.
Yeah.
Or I am a person who drives this specific car.
Exactly. Those are forms. But here's the catch. The ego is fundamentally fragile. It's so insecure because it's based on external things which are unstable and can be lost. It constantly fears its own demise.
So it's always on the defensive. It's always checking its perimeter.
It's worse than that. It actively seeks conflict. To define itself, the ego needs boundaries. It needs an other to be against. It just thrives on separation. If I am right, someone else has to be wrong for me to feel superior and therefore exist more strongly.
That actually explains a lot of internet arguments. But then there's this other concept that I found just fascinating and honestly a little creepy, the pain body. This sounds like something out of science fiction, but the way he describes it feels so relatable.
It is one of his most distinctive terms. The pain body is defined as this energy field of accumulated past emotional pain, trauma. It's stored, he says, literally within the physical body and the psyche.
So it's like a backpack of old emotional junk we carry around.
Think of it more like a semi-autonomous entity. Tolle says it has two states, dormant and active. And when it wakes up, it needs to feed. And what does it eat?
Unhappiness.
Emotional pain, specifically. The pain body can actually hijack a person. It will unconsciously seek out conflict, drama, arguments, criticism, just to feed on that negative energy.
That is terrifying. But also, it explains those moments where you see someone, or maybe you feel it yourself, where you're just poking at a situation. You know you shouldn't say that thing, but you say it anyway, almost like you want the fight.
That would be the pain body feeding itself. And in this view, emotions aren't just random. They are the body's reaction to the ego's false danger signals, all amplified by this accumulated pain.
Okay, so let's recap the diagnosis. We have a parasitic mind that won't shut up, a fragile ego that needs enemies to feel real, and a pain body that is literally hungry for drama. That sounds exhausting. So what's the cure?
If the illness is the mind and it's time traveling, the cure is presence.
Which sounds simple on a bumper sticker. Be your now. But how do you actually do that when your brain is screaming about deadlines?
It's simple, but it's not easy. Presence is defined as, well, pure consciousness that transcends thought. It's a state of inner stillness where you're aware of the present moment without all the mental labeling.
So, practically speaking, how do we get there? Because the power of now is famously practical. It's really pitched as an instruction manual.
It is. The source text highlights a few key techniques. The first one is inner body awareness.
This is the feel the energy in your hands thing, right?
Yes. It's about anchoring yourself in the physical. You breathe consciously. You close your eyes and ask, how do I know I have hands without looking at them? You feel the life energy, that sort of tingling in your hands or throughout your body.
I tried this while reading, and it's actually really hard to think about your grocery list or that angry email when you're really intensely focusing on the sensation in your thumb.
Exactly. You have a finite amount of attention. If you pour it into the inner body, you withdraw it from the mind. Another technique, and maybe the most famous, is becoming the observer.
I love the imagery he uses for this.
It's the practice of watching the thinker. He suggests you wait for the next thought to arise, like a cat watching a mouse hole.
I wonder what my next thought will be.
And what happens when you do that?
Usually, nothing. There's just a silence.
Precisely. That silence is the gap. The act of watching creates a space between the self, the observer, and the thought. You realize, I am not the thought. I am the awareness behind it. That's the moment of disidentification.
And then there's surrender. Now, I have to play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
To a lot of people, surrender sounds like giving up. It sounds like being a doormat, like, oh, the roof is leaking. I surrender to the wetness.
That's a really common misunderstanding. Tolle is very specific here. Surrender, in this context, means accepting the isness of the moment. It's not about being passive in your actions, but about dropping the internal resistance.
Can you distinguish that?
So if you're stuck in mud saying, I hate this mud, I shouldn't be here, this isn't fair, that's resistance. It wastes energy. Surrendering is accepting. Okay, I am in the mud. Once you accept the isness, you can then take effective action to get out.
So it's the difference between clean pain, which is just the reality of the situation, and dirty pain, which is the whole story we tell ourselves about it.
Correct. He uses the metaphor of letting emotions flow like a stream around a stone. You don't block the emotion, you don't judge it, you just observe it. And that severs the link between the emotion and the mental spiraling that usually follows.
Okay, so the power of now essentially fixes me. It fixes the individual. But then he wrote A New Earth in 2005, and this wasn't just about fixing individuals anymore, was it?
No, this is the scale-up. A New Earth is described as a manifesto for the evolution of collective consciousness.
And we can't talk about this book without talking about the Oprah effect.
It's a huge part of the story. Oprah Winfrey didn't just recommend it. She partnered with him for a 10-week webinar. She called it, the most important book written by any living writer. That endorsement just catapulted it from the spiritual shelf to the cultural mainstream.
15 million copies. That is a lot of people trying to lose their ego. But what's the argument here? Is it just the power of now, but for more people?
It applies the diagnosis to the macro level. So Tolle introduces the concept of the collective ego.
Which is what, like a national ego?
Exactly. Groups, nations, religions, corporations, they behave just like the individual ego. They need enemies to define themselves. They need to be right. They exhibit what Tolle calls insane behaviors that lead to war, environmental destruction, you name it.
It's scary how accurate that feels. A nation acting like an insecure teenager picking a fight because its identity feels threatened.
And the collective ego is often even more unconscious than the individual members. That's how you get systemic violence. The structure of the egoic mind, just writ large, creates a world of conflict.
So what's the vision for this new Earth? Is it just everyone sitting around meditating and ignoring the economy?
Not exactly. Tolle distinguishes between inner purpose and outer purpose.
Let's unpack that, because this is where I think people get tripped up on the doing part of it all.
Inner purpose is primary. That is being, awakening, staying in presence. Outer purpose is doing. Your career, your goals, building a house, raising a family.
And the catch.
The catch is the hierarchy. Inner purpose must always come first. If you prioritize outer purpose, even if that purpose is noble, like saving the rainforest or creating world peace, the ego will infiltrate it.
The means corrupt the end.
Precisely. If your state of consciousness isn't clear, your actions will eventually create more suffering no matter how good your intentions are. You'll start, fighting against people to achieve peace, which is the ultimate irony.
That's a heavy concept.
Yeah.
But this is the perfect segue, because now we need to shift gears.
Yes.
We've been pretty complimentary so far. We've explained the system. But this is the I know you don't know segment. We need to look at the critiques from our source material. Because when this philosophy meets the messy reality of being human, things get complicated.
They do. And there are three major critiques we should explore that really challenge the utility of this worldview. The first one challenges that very metaphor we just discussed.
The observer.
The cat watching the mouse hole. Right. Tolle uses metaphors of being a bystander or spectator to encourage detachment. But critics argue this leads to what they call the bystander trap.
Which is,
Well, think about when you feel most alive, when you're performing at your best.
honestly, probably when I'm totally lost in a good movie, or playing sports, or having a really deep conversation.
Exactly. You are immersed. You are fully absorbed. This is what psychologists call flow. Critics argue that we are often most present when we are engaged, not when we are stepping back and watching ourselves like a separate entity.
So by overemphasizing the observer, Tolle might be encouraging a kind of dissociation.
That's the risk, yeah. It can create this schism where you become a spectator of your own life rather than a participant, thinking that detachment is the same as awakening.
That connects to the second critique, which is about negative emotions. Tolle calls them pollution, right?
He views negative emotions essentially as resistance to the now, internal pollution that you need to transmute. But evolutionary psychology and many critics would argue that negative emotions are vital signals.
Yeah, if I'm angry, it's usually for a reason. Maybe someone crossed a boundary,
Yeah.
or I'm in danger.
Precisely. Anger, sadness, fear, they alert us to injustice or unmet needs. They provide, as the source says, rich, beautiful information.
So if I treat my anger as just egoic pollution that I need to surrender to,
You might end up tolerating abuse. You might ignore injustice because you're too busy trying to accept the isness of the situation. You might just bypass the necessary confrontation that could resolve the issue.
that is a dangerous slippery slope.
Yeah.
And that leads us right to the third and maybe most serious critique, ethical relativism.
This is the big philosophical contradiction. Because Tolle prioritizes being over doing, he can end up being pretty passive on moral issues.
The source material mentions his stance on vegetarianism as a prime example of this.
Yes. When asked about animal rights or vegetarianism, Tolle typically says everyone must decide for themselves and that raising your consciousness is the most important thing. He wants to avoid the conflict of telling people what to do.
Which sounds nice and tolerant on the surface. You do you.
But critics call it powerless. They note that he wouldn't say, decide for yourself about something like slavery or murder. By avoiding a hard moral stand to avoid egoic resistance, he risks implying that fighting for justice is just bad vibes.
Right. It's the spiritual bypass. Just focus on your inner peace and ignore the burning building next door.
It creates a real dilemma. If all fighting is ego, how do you fight for a better world? How do you stand up to a tyrant without resistance? Tolle argues you do it through non-resistance, but practically that's very difficult to parse.
Okay, we also have to talk about the style, the rhetoric itself, because reading him, you get a little bit of everything.
Tolle is a master of what we call syncretism.
Meaning he just mixes everything together into a spiritual smoothie.
Pretty much. He blends Buddhism, mysticism, Christianity, Hinduism. He'll sprinkle in quotes from Jesus right next to concepts from the Buddha and Zen koans.
Which makes it super accessible. You don't have to convert to anything to read it. It feels universal.
True. But critics call this syrupy. They argue it leads to category confusion or lazy analysis. By smoothing out all the sharp edges of these religions to make them fit a mass market, you lose the rigor and the depth of the original traditions.
And speaking of mass market, we can't ignore the business side of all this.
The business of enlightenment.
Yeah. There's a bit of a tension, isn't there, between a message that says you have everything you need inside you right now, and then selling expensive retreats, merchandise, and webinars.
It does raise the question, why do we need to monetize contentment? If the goal is inner peace, why is there a price tag? It's a common critique of the whole modern wellness industry, not just Tolle, but he is a major figurehead of it.
And finally, there's a really trippy critique about death.
The ontology of death. Tolle claims, as a fact, that consciousness is non-brain-based, and therefore death is an illusion. You don't die, you just change form.
It's a comforting thought, but the source material points out this is scientifically unknowable.
And if you tell someone who is grieving or someone facing a terminal illness that their fear is just ego and that death isn't real,
It can come off as incredibly dismissive.
it can lack empathy. It dismisses the genuine grief and the very real tragedy of lost potential. It presents a personal spiritual belief as a universal fact.
Wow, okay. So we have the life-changing manual for peace on one hand, and the other, this potential trap of passivity, commercialization, and spiritual bypassing. How do we reconcile this? What's the final verdict?
Despite all the critiques, the legacy is undeniable. The consensus seems to be this: the power of now serves as an incredibly effective instruction manual for individual psychological healing.
It helps people stop spiraling. That's
Yeah.
huge. If it stops a panic attack, it works.
Exactly. And A New Earth functions as a philosophical treatise that attempts to guide society. And even if the philosophy has holes, the impact is real.
Tolle shifted millions of people from obsessing over the past and future to, actually valuing the now.
He is a massive entry point. For so many people, Tolle is the gateway to a deeper spiritual life. He opens the door. Whether you stay in his specific room or move on to other, more rigorous thinkers is, well, it's up to you.
So he's like the gateway drug to mindfulness.
The best possible way, yes.
I want to leave our listener with a thought today. We talked about the pain body, this idea that we have an energy field that feeds on conflict.
Yes.
Here's something to mull over. If the pain body feeds on drama, how much of your daily stress, that argument you pick, that little bit of road rage, that doom scrolling on Twitter, is actually your own biology, looking for a fight just to feel alive?
That is a profound question. Are you fighting for a reason, or are you just fighting to feed the entity?
On that note, we're going to wrap up. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. If you enjoyed our content, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and turn on the notification bell.